Yilin reacted with surprise and calculation, noting its worth versus his kidneys. Wang urged a century-old firm's guarantee and offered a sample for testing. Yilin accepted a cautious sip from the bottle while he weighed the offer. Yilin accepted the sample and tasted the Brain King oral liquid cautiously. The liquid tasted sweet and quickly produced a wave of dizziness across his body. He lay back on the sofa and soon lost consciousness from the effect. The broker's agent reported the success by phone and ordered the team to bring Yilin over. The agent mentioned backup plans and spoke with a tone of confidence. Night fell and two men sat by a small fire outside a dark warehouse. They had brought the unconscious student and wondered why the boss pursued him so urgently. Yilin had accepted the sample and tasted the Brain King oral liquid cautiously. The liquid tasted sweet and produced dizziness that left him unconscious. The broker's agent reported success and ordered the team to bring him. Night fell. Two men sat by a small fire outside a dark warehouse with the unconscious student. In this scene, the boss and his subordinate stood over the prostrate kid. The boss listed regenerated organs and gaped with glee, claiming he could master organ regeneration. He boasted that supreme power and wealth would follow. Then he paused and turned at a faint sound. Night still hung over the yard, while the kid woke despite heavy sedatives and pain. He demanded to know how they had tracked him down through the darkness. The boss stepped forward and declared himself a level 20 job changer and broker. He ordered the kid to surrender obediently and promised the boy would not lose limbs. The kid weighed his options, noting fire would burn the place and cause too much commotion. Instead, he chose a darker path, invoking the forbidden curse called Eternal Freezing Gaze. He sacrificed an eyeball to freeze everything within sight, leaving the boss reeling. Night still cloaked the yard as Kid woke despite heavy sedatives and raw pain. He demanded to know who had tracked him. Boss declared himself a level 20 job changer and broker, ordering surrender and promising no limbs lost. Kid refused flames and instead invoked the forbidden curse Eternal Freezing Gaze, sacrificing an eyeball to freeze everything within sight. Ice erupted, encasing Boss and his blade. Boss stabbed, but the knife could not cut through. He panicked, begged, and revealed disbelief that a level 16 could use such power. Kid sat calm and pressed for names who knew his organ regeneration ability. Night still cloaked the yard as Kid demanded names of those who tracked him. Boss claimed he was a level 20 broker and ordered Kid to surrender immediately. Kid refused and invoked the forbidden curse Eternal Freezing Gaze, sacrificing an eyeball. Ice erupted and encased Boss and his blade, freezing them solid in place. Kid declared he would believe for now and said he would act quickly. He smashed the frozen shell with a single strike and shattered the ice. Boss collapsed among shards, coughing and muttering about sacrificing his stomach first. Kid turned and walked away while a dark shadow coalesced and lingered nearby. Night still cloaked the yard as Kid had frozen Boss and shattered the ice around them. Pillars of ice erupted, sending silhouettes tumbling against cold columns and scattering debris. Smoke curled across the floor while a trembling man crawled and begged not to be killed. The interrogator demanded names and raised a hand crackling with blue electricity around his fingers. Under pressure, the man broke, stammered, and named King Cheng's underground king, Kensen, as the operation's big boss. The shadow that lingered nearby watched as the secret of the syndicate was exposed. Night still cloaked the yard after Kid froze Boss and shattered the surrounding ice. Pillars rose and silhouettes crashed into cold columns while smoke crawled across the floor. Under pressure, a trembling man had named Kensen as the syndicate's boss. Yilin heard the name and frowned. He recognized Kensen as one of King Cheng's praised philanthropists and saw the case deepen. A blue pillar erupted and slammed into the kneeling man, throwing him back. The interrogator's crackling hand remained raised, and the shadow nearby watched as the syndicate's secret widened the danger. Night still cloaked the yard as the kneeling man begged for his life. The interrogator stepped forward and demanded to immediately know the syndicate's leader. Blue electricity crackled around his hand and made the man flinch involuntarily. Under pressure, the trembling man broke and shouted the name of Kenson. Yilin heard the name and frowned. Recognition shifted the case's weight. He understood Kenson's public reputation and the private danger it implied immediately. A blue pillar slammed into the floor and threw the kneeling man backward. The interrogator held his crackling hand raised while shadows watched the widening threat. Night still cloaked the yard as a kneeling man begged for his life, while an interrogator stepped forward and demanded the syndicate's leader. Blue electricity crackled around the interrogator's hand and made the man flinch until, under pressure, he shouted Kenson's name. Yilin heard the name and frowned as recognition shifted the case's weight. A blue pillar slammed into the floor and threw the kneeling man backward, while the interrogator held his crackling hand raised. The cut moved to the Qingcheng underground black market, where Kenson sat in his office and received word that Zhuhu had gone missing. Kenson mocked the loss and kept his cigar poised. At dawn, the boss listened as his right hand reported a failed contact and a burned farmhouse. The right hand said the fire looked like a job holder's work. The boss slammed the floor and ordered them to find the missing man immediately. Underlings dispersed at once to carry out the command. Outside the mansion, 2 visitors were shown up the steps by a receptionist. They joked about the house size and mentioned the requested 2 million. Lingyu treated the sum as trivial and accepted the boss title with a cold smile causing tension. At dawn, the boss had ordered a search after a burned farmhouse report, and underlings dispersed immediately. Later, 2 visitors were shown up the mansion steps and joked about 2 million. Lingyu treated the sum as trivial and accepted the boss title with a cold smile. Inside the foyer, the blonde praised Yilin's concern with appearance, while the dark-haired smirked. They entered a vaulted hall where uniformed staff lined the stairs and offered a formal greeting. Yilin stared and felt overwhelmed by the mansion's scale and display. Earlier at dawn, the boss had ordered a search after the burned farmhouse report. Underlings dispersed, and 2 visitors arrived at the mansion, joking about 2 million. Lingyu had accepted the boss title with a cold smile and steady gaze. Inside the vaulted hall, Yilin still felt overwhelmed by the mansion's scale and display. A maid's uniform drew his stare, and he muttered that life was different here. Uniformed maids then surrounded him and offered to help change his clothes. The boss joked and promised to take Yilin to something big after he changed. The boss arrived at Qingcheng's annual auction, accompanied by a blonde companion. They walked under banners into a crowded vaulted hall where many faces turned toward them. The companion greeted the boss and promised to introduce him to local figures later. The boss excused himself and moved to a banquet table piled with food and wine. While he ate, he glanced at the crowd and thought poor people were inexperienced. He joked he had sacrificed a stomach and that he needed to eat more to compensate it. The boss moved through the hall and drew many curious and wary eyes. 2 women singled out Yilin and called to him across the crowd. Liu Yanwei and her blue-haired companion mocked his reputation and the secret realm test. They accused him of turning tail before a dragon-blood behemoth and asked about his fire control. They said meeting him was bad luck and moved to confront him. Yilin clenched his jaw and wondered what face Liu Yanwei would make knowing he was Ling Yi. The boss had already drawn sharp, curious stares as he moved through the hall. Taunts landed on Yilin until he stopped and introduced his patron as Ling Yu's boss, then presented him to the gathered students. The crowd jeered and tried to belittle the claim, but the mood changed when someone asked the boss's level, and the number was named as level 16. A stunned murmur rose, and another voice recalled the boss ranking first in the novice secret realm. Faces shifted from mockery to awe. Yilin urged calm, offered leveling insights, and proposed training outside the city for better exam results. The crowd had shifted from mockery to awe when boss's level was named. Yilin urged calm and suggested training outside the city to improve exam results. Students seized on the offer, but recalled rules barred leaving the city before the exam. They debated how to train during the journey outside the city. One student admitted his level might be high, but he lacked equipment. Boss dismissed that worry and pointed to the upcoming auction for gear. The wealthy blonde promised his father would fund any purchases. The room brightened as plans moved from doubt to practical hope. Hope from the earlier offer followed the students into the auction hall. King stepped onto the stage and welcomed the distinguished guests as lights carved the room. She presented the Treasure Pavilion's first lot, an epic fire-type skill scroll meant for mage jobs. She announced a starting price of 500,000 and required each bid to increase by at least 10,000. Hands rose across the audience and bids climbed rapidly to 510,000, then 550,000 and 600,000. The auction turned the students' plans into a concrete chance to obtain gear and skills. Hope from the earlier offer followed the students into the hall while King presented the fire skill scroll. Bidding had surged fast until a man stepped forward and shouted a 3 million offer. The audience fell silent, then murmured, and recognized him as Mr. Zhuge in attendance. Nearby, Yilin watched with a plate in hand and noted Zhugenai's newly awakened fire talent. He understood her father's spending and the power money bought in this hall. He also reminded himself that, as a forbidden curse master, he needed no skill scrolls. King presented the rare fire attribute skill scroll and stated the bidding rules to start the auction. Hands rose and offers climbed quickly through hundreds of thousands as excitement spread. A red-haired man stepped forward and shouted a 3 million bid, freezing the hall. Spectators murmured and identified him as Zhuge Kaingsing in attendance. Nearby, Yilin watched with a plate and noted that Zhuge Ninu had awakened a fire talent. He understood how Zhuge Kaingsing used money to sway the room and reminded himself he needed no skill scrolls. An illustrated full-page image and title credits opened the sequence. After the credits, two men stood talking about auction tactics while Yilin watched nearby. One warned the other to avoid drawing attention and to let rich bidders lead. Yilin recalled Zhuge Ninu's awakened fire talent and the presence of Zhuge Kaingsing in the hall. King then introduced the next lot, a Huanglong ring. She explained its spirit attribute boost of 30 and set the opening at 2 million with 100,000 increments. The room tensed as bids prepared to climb. After the opening flutter of bids, fingers shot up across the hall as numbers echoed. Two men inspected the Huanglong ring and noted its 30-point spirit boost, then urged Lingyu to bid. Lingyu deferred to his father, who rose and declared an 8 million offer. He justified the expense as securing the item for the family's future inheritance. The auctioneer acknowledged the bid, and the crowd murmured as the lot moved forward, tension tightening with each raised paddle and promised increment. After initial bids rippled through the hall, fathers raised paddles to secure heirs' inheritances. An 8 million offer from Lingyu's father held the room's attention and set a tense tempo. Kensen then strode forward flanked by aides and loudly declared a 10 million bid, immediately outbidding the earlier offer. The auctioneer paused as the hall hushed and murmurs spread among spectators who recognized the underground king. Yilin tightened his stance, adjusted his glasses, and tried to avoid notice. Security began to circle, and bidders exchanged wary looks. President Jai stepped forward and demanded an explanation, forcing a public confrontation. The public confrontation escalated when Kensen pushed the bid to 12 million, cutting through the murmurs. President Jai warned him and demanded accountability, prompting Kensen's right hand to accept the challenge. Enforcers moved through the crowd and confirmed a car near the warehouse belonged to the Jai group, hardening the accusation. Kensen declared the contest settled and threatened consequences. The auctioneer called the final count, struck the gavel, and sold the lot for 12 million as security watched and spectators processed the defeat. At the auction table, Uncle Lee produced a small red box and opened it. He offered the ring to Yilin and asked if he liked it. Yilin accepted with thanks while nearby men watched and whispered among themselves. A young man leaned forward and asked his father who the visitor had been. The father warned about Kenson's interference and urged caution around the Jai group. Yi Lin nodded and accepted the advice with a sober, serious expression. Later, he slid the ring onto his finger and felt its weight. An inset labeled the Emperor Dragon Ruby listed its spiritual and luck bonuses. Yi Lin accepted the ring and slid it onto his finger, feeling its steady weight. Men at the table exchanged quiet remarks while a father warned about Kenson and the Jai group. Close-up panels displayed the Emperor Dragon Ruby and the dual ringwave bracelet with their spiritual and luck attributes. Yi Lin read the labels and understood their potential. He then strapped the bracelet on and tested its feel. The room settled as murmurs faded. Yi Lin kept a sober expression and noted the risks. Yi Lin had taken the ring and kept its risks in mind. He then handled a long blade as men at the table spoke of its strength and uses. The blade flared and a blue spectral beast rose to answer his intent, filling the room with cold light. Onlookers celebrated how the weapon could secure exam victories and bragged about future invincibility. Yi Lin measured the sword's balance and remained guarded. Later, a woman relaxed in a bath and wondered why the Jai group spent so much on Yi Lin, suspecting a hidden motive. Yi Lin had taken the ring and tested the blade as onlookers praised its power. Later, a red-haired woman soaked in a bath and questioned why the Jai group invested so much in Yi Lin. Men downstairs announced Miss Lu's arrival and asked whether Yan Wei was present. Miss Lu inquired if anyone had information on Ling Yi. Investigator Huang introduced himself and then reported a burned farm in Qingsheng where many had perished. He described residue and traces recovered at the scene that might match the target. He offered to cooperate with Miss Lu on the investigation. Investigator Huang reiterated the burned farm findings and their possible link to the target. Miss Lu reacted angrily and refused the notion that Ling Yi could be Yi Lin. A companion told her to calm down as Huang presented analysis supporting his claim. He said forensic residue and traces increased the probability that the suspect was Yi Lin. Miss Lu dismissed the conclusion, calling Yi Lin a frightened transmigrator who had fled. She argued he could not be Ling Yi nor wield hellfire despite the evidence. The room held taut tension between disbelief and the pressing investigative results. Investigator Huang pressed for confirmation while his eye glowed and his tone sharpened. Zhuge Ninu stood under the lie detection label and insisted she alone had seen Ling Yi in person. She declared Yi Lin could not be the cowardly attacker. Huang noted that no one could lie before a polygraph expert like him. He adjusted his conclusion and suggested the murderer seemed not to be Yi Lin. He thanked the women, asked them to report any information, and left. The room's tension held between disbelief and Huang's mounting forensic case. Night cloaked the training building as two men stepped onto the balcony. The taller blonde smiled and offered the escort a brief explanation of intent. A receptionist came forward and politely asked the men for their levels. One man reported level 16, while the other did not identify himself. The blonde requested a training room for level 40 and below instead. The receptionist confirmed the fee and promised to arrange the proper room immediately. She led them to an elevator and descended into a cavernous chamber marked FOURTY. A solitary figure stood at center as rows of small targets filled the floor. The men paused and watched the room's scale before carefully stepping inside. Night still hung above the training building as the trio reached the balcony edge. The blond man smiled and briefed his companions while the receptionist confirmed the proper room and fee. She led them into an elevator that descended and opened onto a cavernous chamber with a FOURTY sign. Rows of small targets covered the floor and a solitary trainee stood at the center. The solitary trainee erupted in a red-black aura that split the air. The party advanced through aisles of ringed booths, each marked 40. The spectacled man produced a testing cartridge and readied himself for the trial. They entered the cavernous chamber beneath the training building and found numbered booths. A solitary trainee stood in the center and produced a dark aura. the spectacled man readied a testing cartridge as the crowd waited in ringed aisles. The trainee erupted into motion and launched dozens of shadow blades at the targets. The strike bore the label Cursed Spear Life Sword and pierced the floor. A blue field spread and threw silhouettes into the air with force. When the attack ended, the trainee stepped forward and said a single word, "Good." The blonde man and receptionist compared footage and discussed the outcome in a nearby booth. Later, the receptionist sat apart, scrolling through footage while others filed out. They moved on from the testing hall, and the building's night grew colder. 2 sentries stood at the stone steps while men gathered inside. Suddenly, screams split the dusk as figures fell outside the entrance. Alarms spread into an office where a meeting fractured into panic. A knife flashed and a suited man doubled over spouting blood. The attacker kept striking through the room while security tried to respond. Men collapsed one after another as the lone assailant moved among the bodies, and silence returned between sobs. They left the testing hall, and the night air cooled around the building. 2 sentries guarded the steps while men gathered inside. Screams then shattered the dusk as figures collapsed outside the entrance. A gunman shouted the name Kenson and fired into the hall. People dropped and a lone assailant pressed through the room, cutting down those who tried to move. Security tried to intervene and failed. Blood pooled and a thin trail led away toward the service corridor. A watching man smelled blood and sprinted after the trail into the dark. After the hall shots, bodies lay heaped near the service entrance and sentries held the steps. A man tracked the thin blood trail into a dim corridor and found a pile of wounded figures. 2 young men arrived, scanned the scene, and spoke about entering the testing hall to check the results. They paused beneath a warning sign, climbed deeper, and read a document. While one kept watch, an unseen assailant suddenly thrust a blade into the smiling blonde's neck. Panic broke and the corridor erupted into shouts and movement. Following the initial gunfire, bodies lay heaped by the service entrance as sentries held the steps. A spectacled man tracked a thin blood trail into a dim corridor and found wounded figures piled in a recess. An unseen assailant had already struck the smiling blonde man at the testing hall entrance. The spectacled man checked the wound, then vowed to expose Kenson and raced forward. He followed the blood spray that smeared across cables and concrete high over the corridor. High on the wall, a dark torn shape clung to the concrete while a glove fell. At the corridor mouth sentries, and a small group faced the ruined hall. After the earlier shots and the bodies by the service entrance, the spectacled man traced a thin blood trail into a dark corridor and found wounded figures stacked in a recess. Someone had already struck the smiling blonde at the testing hall, and the spectacled man vowed to expose Kenson before pushing onward. Blood smeared across cables and concrete led him through the ruins as a torn shape clung to the wall and a glove dropped. At the corridor mouth, a small group waited with red laser sights. The masked man realized he had been discovered, cursed the infrared cameras, and faced orders to meet the boss. The spectacled man moved through the corridor and realized he had been discovered. A smug blonde man appeared in a cutaway and watched with a satisfied smile. A small group of guards trained red laser sights on the spectacled man and advanced. They called him brother and said the boss had been waiting for him. The spectacled man cursed the infrared cameras and protested that discovery came too fast. A spectral demon coalesced behind him into a black many-eyed form. The corridor filled with red beams and sudden dread as capture closed. The spectacled man tried to move, while guards closed around him in the corridor. They called him brother and said the boss had been waiting behind the lasers. Infrared beams marked every step as a black demon coalesced into many-eyed smoke behind him. When combat broke, purple tendrils lashed into a man and tore flesh. He yelled that his kidney had been ripped out as blood spattered. The spectacled man was lifted and thrown beneath writhing shadow and smoke. The corridor filled with red beams, panic, and sudden capture. The spectacled man struggled as guards sealed the corridor, and the boss waited beyond the infrared lasers. A black demon condensed into many-eyed smoke behind them, and purple tendrils lashed out, ripping a man and tearing flesh as he screamed his kidney had been taken. The spectacled man was thrown beneath writhing shadow, and alarms flared. A masked figure then surged through the chaos, shouting a fleeting dance and urging speed. He unleashed wind magic that formed blade-like currents and cut through the smoke. He stepped into a doorway and faced two armed figures who remarked on his backing and secrecy. The spectacled man had struggled as guards sealed the corridor and boss waited beyond the lasers. A black demon had condensed into many-eyed smoke and tore a man while alarms flared. A masked figure then surged through the chaos and cut the smoke with wind magic. He stepped into a doorway and faced two armed figures. The spectacled man opened with Starfall Trace and then Curse Spirit Life Sword. The two assailants countered with wind blade strikes. They traded rapid blades and sparks, and blood arced from fresh wounds. Two men nearby laughed as the final clash burst in light. The spectacled man had struggled as guards sealed the corridor and boss waited beyond lasers. A black demon condensed into many-eyed smoke and tore a man while alarms flared. A masked figure surged through chaos and cleaved the smoke with wind blades. He stepped into a doorway and faced two armed assailants trading rapid strikes. The spectacled man opened with Starfall Trace and then with Curse Spirit Life Sword. They countered with wind blade attacks and sparks flew as blood arced. The final clash burst in light and one assailant staggered beneath repeated hits. A man with purple eyes cursed and winced, calling the 10th strike intense. Spectacled man rose slowly and scanned the ruined corridor for remaining threats. Spectacled man rose and scanned the ruined corridor for remaining threats. A wounded woman spat accusations and then collapsed, her form dissolving into smoke. He reacted with sudden focus and extended a hand as energy curled around his fingers. Crimson and teal light coiled and then burst into a concussive wave down the hall. The blast slammed guards and suited men against walls and stairs, blood and debris scattering. Survivors screamed and fled while the lingering demon residue churned on the floor. When the smoke cleared, spectacled man surveyed the wreckage and the terrified figures retreating into shadows. After clearing the corridor, spectacled man watched survivors scatter into shadow. He moved up the stairwell after a light. Each step was measured despite his heavy breathing. Halfway up, silhouettes blocked the landing and called to him. A grinning assailant taunted him as others closed in. One lunged with a knife. Spectacled man steadied his hand and let energy coil along his fingers. He released it into the floor and a concussive wave tore outward. The blast slammed the attacker's back and cracked concrete while smoke drifted along the stairs. Spectacled man had cleared the corridor and moved up the stairwell after a light. Shadows blocked the landing and several attackers rushed him. One stepped forward and sneered, calling him a curse master and mocking his habit of burning life to gain power. Spectacled man did not reply. He focused, let energy coil along his fingers, and ignited a burning curse. Red ribbons of flame coiled and danced around his hands. He released burning reincarnation, fleeting dance, and the spell tore along the steps. The blast struck concrete and metal, slamming attackers back and cracking the stair while smoke drifted through the stairwell. Spectacled man had cleared the corridor and moved up the stairwell after his light. Shadows filled the landing and several attackers rushed him at once. He did not answer their taunts and instead concentrated energy along his fingers. Red ribbons of flame coiled around his hands and he invoked a burning curse. He released burning reincarnation, fleeting dance, and the spell tore along the steps. The blast slammed the assailants back and cracked concrete beneath them while smoke drifted through the stairwell. A towering spectral form emerged behind him as he channeled power. After the confrontation, he slumped into a waiting vehicle and watched the ruined landing. Spectacled man had cleared the stairwell and driven power into the landing earlier. A grinning assailant reappeared and taunted him before closing in. The man was struck hard and blood ran from his face as he staggered across the shattered concrete. He hooked his fingers on the railing and crashed through the landing, tumbling and gasping. On the stairwell, the attacker promised future payment in a kidney and listed other organs as spoils. The injured man, breathing shallow and wounded, muttered assent while smoke and debris settled around them. The assailant struck Spectacled Man, sending him crashing through the landing and gasping. He had promised payment in a kidney and listed other organs as spoils. Smoke and shattered concrete settled, while silence pulsed quietly along the stairwell. A sudden chant split the air, and a curse formed above the city. Bright blue thunder coalesced into a huge column and ripped downward through clouds. It struck the skyline, gouging glass and concrete, leaving a smoking wound across blocks. Spectacled Man looked up, face streaked with blood, eyes wide with dawning horror. The assailant struck Spectacled Man, and blue lightning tore through the stairwell's interior. Glass and concrete exploded outward, and bodies were hurled across the landing. Spectacled Man screamed as electric shards shredded his clothes and seared his skin. A sweeping wind of fragments blurred vision and carried the scent of ozone. A towering silhouette rose from the smoke and dismissed any need for answers. It told the wounded to go and meet the King of Hell instead. Down the stairs, Kid staggered, bloodied, admitting he had sacrificed too many organs and felt dizzy. In a dim room, a woman checked a half-naked man on the bed. He lay bandaged and breathing hard. Then blue energy tore through the wall and struck an intruder beside the doorway. Fragments and light filled the air. A larger silhouette moved with surgical speed and delivered the killing blow. The assailant crumpled and bled out on the floor. The wounded man rose on shaking legs and muttered that he had sold too many organs. He felt dizzy and walked away in only his underwear while the woman watched in silence. The half-naked kid stood trembling in the doorway and demanded answers. An assailant stepped inside and the kid pleaded about his sister. The intruder's eye flared and a circular tear of blue energy opened in the air. Light and shards filled the room as a spectral force struck. A tiny blue ember rose from the kid's chest and drifted away. Pain engulfed him, flames licked his skin, and he screamed. He staggered and collapsed to the floor while the woman watched in silence. The half-naked kid had collapsed on the tiles, with a blue ember drifting from his chest. A black-haired woman stood over him and watched without moving. An assailant buckled as a spectacled man bled and smirked. The woman yanked a struggling man and barked to stop. A blade wielder lunged with a blue blade and slashed toward them. Blue shards sprayed across the corridor and struck tile. The woman cupped a shard and formed a jagged ice piece. Bodies hit the floor while the corridor filled with tense silence. A desperate man spat a confession and dared them to kill him there. The black-haired woman watched without moving, her expression flat and still unreadable. An upside-down man choked out a broken insult and then collapsed hard. The blade wielder charged with a blue blade and cut across the corridor. Blue shards sprayed from the strike and hammered into tile and flesh. Without hesitation, the woman cupped a shard and formed it into a jagged ice. Bodies hit the floor, and the corridor immediately fell into tense silence. The collapsed kid lay near the spill as the scene held its breath.